Approved. The next item is to review and discuss a request for the town of Shrewsbury to notify pregnant women about the latest study on fluoride's link to reduced IQ in children, requested by Brian Moss, 16 Ruthven Circle, Shrewsbury, Mass. Brian, you have your 10 minutes that you requested.
Thank you very much. Just before I start, I was just wondering if I could ask for an additional 5 minutes, just because, I'll just give you the reason, because I've also been requesting with the Board of Selectmen. With the Board of Selectmen are deferring completely to the Board of Health, so I haven't had a chance to present to them at all. So that kind of changes that dynamic, because they're saying this is not the forum for it, and they want to put it all on the Board of Health. So I was wondering if I can, since I'm the only one on the agenda, if I could get
Well, keep it to 10, as close to 10 minutes as possible. I would appreciate it.
Okay. All right, so I just wanted to back up a little bit, because I know there's some new Board of Health members, but conversations have been going on for 5 years. Actually, 5 years ago, and this is in your materials, I had sent a letter to the Board of Health identifying some of the studies that show a neurotoxic effect of fluoride, on the brain of children. And some of these studies were, like, for example, the Harvard finding that fluoride damages children's brains, as seen in lower IQ test scores. But that was, some of the response to that was that these studies are not from the US, right? These are studies from China. That study from Harvard was based on studies from China, studies from Iran or India or other parts of the world. So that was kind of the big kind of push behind, these aren't really in our purview yet. Interesting note is that we weren't accepting studies from China, but we accept the sodium fluoride from China to put in our water supply. So it's kind of a double standard, right? Well, the studies aren't good enough from China, but we'll take their sodium fluoride, which, I don't know if people know where the sodium fluoride comes from in China. It actually comes from it's the hazardous waste product of the phosphate fertilizer plant in China, and that's been verified by the town, where they have identified, they went back to the source and said, where are you getting this from? And they went back and they said, well, we're getting it from this supplier in China. And I said, where's that supplier getting it from? And they said, oh, we're getting it from this plant. I said, well, where's that plant getting it from? Well, it's from this phosphate fertilizer plant, right? And if you don't know how it's done, is that they mine the phosphate ore, they add sulfuric acid to it. That creates these fluoride gases. And normally the fluoride gases is a waste product, right, of creating the phosphate. It goes up the smokestack, but it's too toxic to let it out into the air. So the Clean Air Act says you can't let fluoride go out because it's too toxic. So they say you can't do that. So the wet scrubbers spray water and capture it. Well, when you spray water on those gases, it creates hydrofluorosilicic acid, which is what we were getting from North Carolina before the new plant, right? Comes right, whatever comes from that mining element goes up, is captured and sent to us, so we put it in our drinking water. So I just want to, and please, if there's anything I'm saying that you don't believe is based in fact, please call me out on it at some point or ask questions later. I'm hoping you ask, me questions on it, because I'm providing you information that we've verified. So just a small note on that. So the first time that we had brought the citizens petition to the town, I kind of listed a lot of things, because remember, fluoridation has to be absolutely perfect, right? It has to be perfectly, absolutely safe for everybody with no problems, or else you can't put it in the water, right? So we did bring up some ethical things, saying you're forcing those people, to drink it. They don't have, you're breaking the informed consent rules and stuff like that. 99% of it gets wasted anyways, because it just goes down the toilet or wash your car with it. 40%, we mentioned 40% of American teens show visible signs of fluoride overexposure. That's the dental fluorosis. So myself, I have yellow teeth from the fluoride in the water, because I grew up in Shrewsbury. That will actually, the CDC's own number says that 41% of American children between the ages of 12 and 14 have dental fluorosis. Probably one of the reasons why in 2016 that they lowered it by 30% from 1 part per million to 0.7 part per million, right? So here we are, we've been fluoridating in Shrewsbury for 67 years, and all of a sudden we say, well, let's lower that by 30%, sorry, right? So that's another reason why it's kind of one size fits all for a whole community. But again, the Board of Selectmen and Board of Health voted all of that down recommended to town meeting members, keep it in the water. Then, there were more studies that came out that linked it, having problems with the thyroid, hypothyroidism. There were studies out of England. So we felt this important to bring this. Plus, we were building a new water plant, and so we had to spend money this was the time to decide, we want to spend $30,000 and put all this equipment in there again, or do we not want to? So that's the main reason why we brought some of this stuff forward, including we had more studies coming out. So I provided those studies. Interestingly enough, we had the manganese problem. Well, Shrewsbury, during its manganese issue, if you notice, they'll say, well, manganese is a developmental neurotoxin, right? So you had our water superintendent emailing saying, we got to get rid of this magnesium. It's a developmental neurotoxin. Well, in the information that they referenced Mass Department of Environmental Protection had materials that said, here's where magnesium is listed as a developmental neurotoxin. And in that, the material showed that they had a list. They said it's a neurotoxin like lead, arsenic, manganese, fluoride, right? It was in that list. So here's the town putting out, here's this information, you follow the information, you go to Mass Department of Environmental Protection, and then you go and you find that it's actually, they're listing it as a referencing it as a developmental neurotoxin. So that was in my 16-page, you also have this in materials, 16-page supplemental that I had sent in 2016 to support getting fluoride out of the water in 2016. It has all those references you can look at. It's got links to everything. One thing of note in that as well is, maybe for Dr. Abraham as well, as we had presented the case about, as physicians, or the American Medical Association, they would, they have their own code, right? So you have the American Medical Association Code of Medical Ethics, right? If you go right out to their site, and they'll say informed consent to medical treatment is fundamental in both ethics and law. Patients have the right to receive information and ask questions about recommended treatment so that they can make well-considered decisions about care. This is a fundamental right. But if we just put fluoride in the water, you bypass that, right? You're not getting, and here's information coming out, they're not getting it, right? We're saying with new studies that come out with more links, they're not able to see this. They're not able to ask questions about that. Say, are these risks worth it for me if I'm pregnant? Should I be drinking the water? They don't even have that information. So they're not really getting informed consent because we're not asking, the Board of Selectmen and Board of Health to pass this information along with no judgment. I'm not saying to say these are correct. These are the everything, believe everything in here. It's just these studies, the town said these peer-reviewed studies do not exist that show any link to any harm to anything but dental fluorosis. That's what the town meeting heard, right? So as you're presenting recommendations, this was the water commissioners that told town meeting this. Well, the town meeting is going to say, oh, there's no link to any harm, no studies that show any link to any harm. Well, it doesn't matter what's being brought before us. Let's keep it in the water. It's perfectly, absolutely safe. I don't even have to worry. There's no studies. Well, now, there were studies then, but I'll give credit to, maybe there weren't U.S. studies like we talked about, so I can kind of understand where that may have come from. But now we have U.S.-funded studies that show a link to harm. They show a specific link that when you drink fluoride or exposed to fluoride, a pregnant woman is exposed to fluoride during pregnancy, that is showing a link to lower IQ. So in 2016, that's actually when they dropped the amount to 0.7. Now another thing that doctors would be interested in would be. We also brought up in 2016 that petition. We also mentioned more things saying we care about informed consent, but there are other problems with fluoridation. Violates informed consent. There's no control over who gets it. So pregnant women are going to get this and drink it, whether anybody likes it or not, right? There's no control of dose. So when you look at it, and no control of dosage. So when you look at it, the actual fetus is the one that gets the most exposure out of anybody in this community, right? So if somebody says, I'm fine with fluoride, but we weigh 200 times more than a fetus, and we are not in a developmental stage right now. So we mentioned all of this stuff. But again, both the Board of Selectmen and Board of Health both recommended and provided absolute assurances that fluoride is safe and effective, right? There are no issues with this. There are no science that proves that there's an issue with it, right? That's very tricky to say, right? And I can appreciate that, right? We'll say, well, I know from the minutes of one of the meetings, Dr. Abraham, I appreciated your scientific analysis of some of the studies that showed these ones that I presented on lower IQ. You actually mentioned that there were limitations to the studies, and I appreciate that, because that's what I'm asking for, is to say, well, we now have two studies, BOH, which is from 2017, which was a 12-year, multi-million-dollar study that was done in Mexico, right, funded by the U.S. government, shows this link between maternal exposure and lower IQ in children. The second part that the water commissioners had told last time was, not only is there not a peer-reviewed study, but there's not any peer-reviewed studies that have repeated the same findings. So after the 2016 town meeting, now you have this BOH study come out. But I didn't bring it forward at that time, right, because one study. But then you had this new study published, which is again a multi-year, multi-million-dollar study funded by the U.S. government in Canada that kind of duplicated those findings or showed the same findings. So now we have an existence of a study, two peer-reviewed studies that repeat the findings, and now they exist. So we told town meeting they don't exist, and now they do exist. So that's why I'm saying let's notify them, because town meeting is under the impression that these studies don't exist, but now they do exist. So if these two studies do it, one of the arguments is, well, these are just two studies. So that's why in my most recent email, I know you're looking for guidance from the Mass Department of Public Health. And, you know, we all trust the organizations, right? I trust them as well, but I'm into verifying, because we're not always right, or there's always something, right? So I call it trust but verify. So the Mass Department of Public Health is probably going to say fluoridation is safe and effective. You know, it's one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century. That's fine, great, but I'm guessing that if Worcester tried to get it out of the water 4 times, I mean, they tried 4 times and failed to get it into the water in Worcester. It should be so easy. Show us the safety studies, right? If it's absolutely safe for every population, fetuses, pregnant women, no matter what your medical condition is, you can drink as much as you want, as long as you want for your entire life. It's okay. There's no link to any harm. To make that bold of a statement, there's got to be a lot of good science underneath that. Great. Let's see it, right? So that's why I'm hoping the board doesn't just stick with the safe and effective greatest public health achievement in the 20th century. We've given that to the town meeting. That's what, town meeting is the decision makers. Chairman Vigilant, we said that in 2016, you agreed when I last presented that town meeting is the one that voted in 1952, and they're the ones that will vote it out, and Board of Selectmen have said that as well in the past. Board of Health gives recommendations, same with water commissioners. But I think there's one thing missing, because so far you have 2 studies that show a link to harm of maternal exposure, right, to lower IQ. So I have 2 studies, and might criticize and say there's some limitations to these, and there are only 2 studies. So, okay, put that in this hand. I have 2 studies in this hand. Show me it's safe for pregnant women. So I'm putting out my other hand, and I'm going to say that should be easy. This should be a slam dunk, right? We've been doing this for 67 years. 2/3 of Americans are getting this. Everybody is getting it. Drinking as much or as little as they want for their entire lives. There should be some great safety studies that says this is especially for the most sensitive water customers. But there isn't. We haven't been through any of these efforts. 2015, 2016, 0. So now we have 2 against 0. So I'm saying if you have 2 studies with some limitations, but no studies, so we sent out the I asked for that to be sent out to the Mass Department of Public Health. I would imagine they could just reach back on the shelf, right? Because, hey, they must have used it in every effort to either put fluoride in the water or to stop the Worcester efforts. They probably should be able to just reach back and say, oh yeah, here are all these safety studies that we provided everybody. Here you go. But we don't have any. So I'm just hoping that that you hold, trust but verify, and make sure that we're saying that it's absolutely safe, that it shouldn't be a difficult thing to be able to provide these safety studies. And when I say safety studies, there's a difference. To prove it's safe, and this is where, like doctors like Dr. Abraham would be very familiar with, when you have a new drug, in order to say it's safe and effective, you must take that and you must test that against a placebo. So you have to say, I have this drug, and I'm going to test it against these people, and then these people with the placebo. And if you looked at the text, when they describe it, they say if you don't use, you're leaving things to chance if you don't test against the placebo. So that's why I'm asking, hopefully we can follow through with that, get the safety studies, and then I can go away. Just provide me the safety studies and I'll go away. So I'm giving you that challenge. Make me go away. Give me those safety studies. And by safety studies, 1, clinical trials against placebos, and 2, clinical, if you have them, if it proves it's safe for, 200-pound men, you also need, from drugs, you can't, if you have pregnant women is a whole different class population, you have to have clinical trials that include everybody in the population. So I'm hoping you'll do that. And then just lastly, there's a little bit of, I know the Board of Selectmen, who are the water commissioners, are completely absolving themselves of responsibility and are putting it all on your shoulders. I know from 2016, we agreed, because we looked at the law. If you look at the actual law, the law says that really all the Board of Health can do is order it into the water. And we know that didn't happen in Shrewsbury, because this law came along after. But it doesn't say that it has any other power other than being able to order in the water. So that's what we said, town meeting put it in, town meeting will take it out. So town meeting is looking towards these two boards to help, hopefully analyze it. The Board of Health can give its public health recommendation, but the water commissioners, when the town voted in 1953, they said, here's the money, please go maintain this fluoridation program. It's basically what they said. So inherently, there's a responsibility whenever you get money, right? If my parents give me money, I've got to be responsible with that money. I probably should tell them what's going on. And so that's where we're at. That's why I'm in the Board of Selectmen Water Commissioner meetings, because I feel like they have a responsibility as water commissioners who have also voted and weighed in the last 2 efforts, right? Saying keep it in the water, here's why, right? So they've already weighed in and made precedents that they've already weighed in. So they're going to send a letter to say it's on you, 100%. So I'm hoping that you can clarify that with them and say based on what you said in 2016, I would assume that you would send a letter back saying it's town meeting and you're just providing recommendations. It's not 100% you, but I'm just hoping you can reply in some way to clarify what was said by the Board of Health in 2016. Thank you.
Okay.
And I hope you ask me questions, please, because there's a lot, this is, we.
So I just wanted to clarify one factual correction to your statement, Mr. Moss. So you mentioned it's a U.S. government study done in Canada. I was just looking at the funding. It's all Canadian government funding. So the study that you quoted, which was published in JAMA Pediatrics, if you look at the last page, it clearly tells you where the source of funding is. It's not the U.S. government funding it, it's the Canadian government which is funded. Canadian government is one of the several funding, but there is no U.S. government funding. So just to clarify, U.S. government generally doesn't fund studies outside of the country. They study.
I'll double check my source on that and resend it if I can find
I have the paper printed
Yeah,
out which you
fine.
provided, so happy to. I think it's right there on the last but one page.
No, thank you. I'll double check and.
Sure.
Yeah, I would just like to say that the agenda item for today is about the notification to pregnant women. And since the board 2 meetings ago had said that we were not recommending, or we were not going to go forward with the notification, therefore, my main concern at this meeting was to deal with the email that you sent asking the Massachusetts Department of Public Health and the Worcester Medical Director to provide you with the various placebo-based studies to prove their claim that swallowing fluoride is safe for pregnant women and their fetus. As we've said before, as I've said before, I rely very heavily on the public health experts at the Department of Public Health, the CDC. I'm not an expert in this subject, so I rely on the public health professionals who have spent their lives working on these issues, public health issues. And I'm staying with that position that I'm relying on their expertise. And I don't feel that we should be asking them to basically prove their claims or justify their positions because they're the experts. They're making their positions known based on their expert opinion, their study of medical science. So I don't feel that we should be in a position of asking them to basically prove their case to us.
I would counter that.
Okay?
I think when you're in the field of public health, you're constantly having to prove your stance with evidence, right? And so I think it is fair to ask for that evidence.
Okay?
So I think the Commissioner of Public Health, Worcester, was contacted, and he in fact has reached out back to us to say that there is currently no evidence to suggest that it is harmful, and so they have not changed their position in Worcester, nor have they changed their position in the state, nor have they changed their position in the country. So while if evidence exists, I'd be happy to see it as well. And I think it's fair that state or government, national agencies can provide evidence if they are requested. And so I don't see, again, that we as a town specifically need to take a position right now. But should evidence arise, I'd be open to reviewing this matter again, definitely. But at this point in time, not aware of any evidence, and the state has not told us that there is anything either, nor is there on the CDC's website.
So were you saying that they don't have studies that show it's not harmful?
Correct. That no studies that they endorse that says that there's a body of science which requires a change in position. I think that's the point. There are always studies published, as we discussed with the study that Mr. Moss had sort of presented, which raises its own concerns about methodological validity, et cetera, but the editors put it out there just to raise the subject so as to be able to talk about it, et cetera. And I think that's absolutely valid in scientific circles to continue to raise the issue, but till there is a certain body of science which suggests a change in practice, that's why nobody has come out yet to recommend a change in practice, which is what Mr. Moss is alluding to.
Well, I think it's two different things. It's taking the fluoride out of the water, and then the other one is just notifying women that may become pregnant or are pregnant of the concerns, right? So that's two different things.
Right.
Correct. And that's exactly when the request is to notify pregnant women about the concerns, the question is, what's the basis for that? And if so, shouldn't there be something across the country if there was that overwhelming body of science which supports that is the question. And no one across the country has recommended that this become a practice, et cetera, so as to suggest that there should be a notification, because if today's fluoride, tomorrow could be something else, another day could be something else, we might be creating a degree of public alarm which may or may not be justified. So that's why governmental agencies are always thoughtful about when they notify about any public health issue, because they have something to stand by in terms of, so at this point in time, all I'm saying is, I think a question has been raised, which is very valid, and Mr. Moss has brought that to us. I think there's literature, there are questions been raised, but not bubbled up enough, or there's not a body of evidence that's strong enough yet to cause a change in practice. That's all I'm suggesting.
So I think one of the things that he raised was that there isn't a body of evidence to prove that it is safe, right?
Well, I haven't researched that to that degree, but I would defer to our public health agencies to really be able to opine on that. So this has not been an area that I've researched to the extent of finding the body of evidence. So, which is why I haven't, so I couldn't conclusively speak to that.
So we weren't able to respond to his request to find studies from
Well,
SDPH
I
and
think
Worcester
the purpose
Director?
of this meeting is to discuss it among ourselves in open meeting. I didn't feel it was proper for the Board of Health to just arbitrarily grant the request without discussing it first in open meeting.
Okay.
So that was my main thrust of this meeting. So what is the feeling of the board in regard to making the requests of the Mass Department of Public Health and Worcester Medical Director that Mr. Moss is asking?
Well, I couldn't speak to their capacity, capability, and ability to be able to do this sort of a research or not, so I'm not sure that we need to, I think Mr. Moss could directly reach out to them. It doesn't necessarily have to come from us. As a concerned citizen, he's entitled to reach out to the Worcester County or the state. I'm just concerned about the time and effort and whether the agency is able to do that or not. So without knowing that information, I'm hesitant to put an additional burden on them.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that, obviously, Jenny, you're in favor of asking for the information?
Yes.
It sounds like
I'd be opposed.
I would be opposed also, so I guess we should probably make a motion from the board, since we have a difference of opinion. If someone would like to make a motion in regard to asking the Massachusetts Department of Public Health and the Worcester Medical Director to provide them with scientific evidence to prove their claims. Do I have a motion to do that?
Motion is in the affirmative always.
I
so-
motion to ask for it.
So I'm opposed.
Okay, so is it seconded? Well, I'll second the motion, but we'll take a vote. All in favor of asking signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed signify by saying no.
No.
So it's 2-1 not to ask for the information. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for letting me come in today and
Yep.
present.
Okay, the next item is to review and act on the report from the Central Massachusetts Regional Public Health Alliance.
All right,